So our speaker tonight represents something fundamental, something at the foundation, something that holds a promise or a curse of changing everything. He was born in Kent, where Winston Churchill's home was for most of his life, and lives in the village where Winston Churchill's great home Chartwell is in Westerham. He went to fancy what we call secondary school, whatever they call public school. He decided not to go to college for the high-minded reason that he wanted to make a lot of money. He did a fateful thing in 1993, and it is earth-shaking. It's earth-shaking because it defies every trend. He left the Conservative Party and he started a new political party, the United Kingdom Independence Party. And that party was built to resist this great trend to this thing that is only in recent times. I'm an old man and I know that 5 years ago nobody said this. The trend is now called the International Liberal Order. And what it means is that complex international institutions that not 100 people can explain how they work are to make very important decisions for everybody. I learned today, watching this man on YouTube, and you should go and search Nigel Farage European Parliament speech after Brexit. And you'll find a 7-minute thing, and it is just frightening. It's so bold. And of course, there's an utter repudiation of him from the people there, and there's an utter repudiation of them from him. He's been a member of the European Parliament. I'm moved to add, whatever that may be, since 1999. Britain is leaving the European Union, and the movement to do that started with him. For reasons that I explained today, I have always thought it was a bad idea for Britain to be a member of that thing, especially after it became a governing thing. And that's my personal opinion, and I made very clear today repeatedly, I can't speak for Winston Churchill about that, he's dead. But I know what he said, and I know that what he treasured about British politics, and I believe that he believed, that that was one of the great things, and it was in peril. And then this man who didn't go to college, he has that in common with Winston Churchill. He rose up to take all that on. He's won the same approval for his wonderful victory that Donald Trump has won. For example, recently on Bill Moyers and Company website, he is described as Britain's most venomous demagogue. The immigrant-hating Farage was a founder of the UK Independence Party and leader of Brexit. He is a one-man incarnation of hatred, a fake populist and a media darling wherever viciousness is welcome. A figure of barbarian globalization. Now, this is what they wrote on the morrow of the astonishing victory. And think who's being held in contempt by those words. It's not just him. It's 53% of the British people. He's written 2 books. He's a World War I history enthusiast. He's a member of the East India Club. Lord, that is not the most politically correct establishment in Great Britain. He likes cricket and sea fishing, and English pubs, and partly in the interest of the reputation of our college, I've been explaining to him at some length over dinner that he doesn't drink as much as he says he does. Nor did Winston Churchill. I think he's raised something fundamental. I think he's a proof that history doesn't work in some progress towards some inevitable end, and therefore I think he's one of the most important men. Nigel Farage.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, Mr. President, thank you for your kind words and for the alternative curriculum vitae from the liberal establishment media, who are the enemies of all freedom-loving people. And thank you to Hillsdale for looking after me so beautifully. Hospitality, fun, a few glasses of wine, and a room full of people of very, very like minds. You know, there's one thing about 2016 that I feel very strongly, and I feel that the relationship between the United States of America and the United Kingdom, which had been driven apart willfully by President Obama. Can I get more of a boo and a hiss, please? Come on, wake up at the back, for goodness sake. President Obama, who did not believe in the very special relationship between our two nations, who didn't comprehend or wish to understand that between the two of us, twice in the 20th century, we crushed tyranny in the name of liberty, freedom, and democracy. No, President Obama looked towards the Germans. He looked towards Angela Merkel. That was to be America's... Didn't hear you. No, not all the Germans. They're quite nice people now. I should know this, I've even married one. But Merkel, who was the embodiment of the individual, liberty-loving nations of Europe coming together in this monstrous formation called the EU, and Obama thought that was who America's greatest ally should be, and he even dared to intervene in our referendum campaign. Oh, Larry, they're warming up now. It's getting better. He even dared to intervene, to say to an ally with whom we had shared many triumphs and many tragedies over the course of the last century, he dared to intervene to say that if the United Kingdom dared to take back its independence, its liberty, that this country, the USA, would put us to the back of the line. Well, shame on him. Shame on him. And I believe that what 2016 saw was the start of a great global revolution. And the real significance of it is that as much as your Obamas or your Tony Blairs or your New York Timeses I did promise Hillsdale I'd do a serious speech, but as much as all these people now wish to pretend that Brexit and Trump were just a short-term outpouring of anger from ignorant, stupid, aged, white, working-class people, and they think we'd all come to our collective senses, they would all like to turn the clock back to 2015 and pretend that none of this had actually happened. The message that comes out from 2016 is that what happened is not a blip. What happened is not a temporary phenomenon. What happened is the start of a great global revolution, and the nation state has made its comeback. Now, in many ways, this phenomenon had to start with this project called the European Union, because it was the forerunner of a new form of global government. And I say that because it had three essential prerequisites. The first was that power should be taken away from the voters, taken away from those who once every 4 or 5 years might change the direction of the ship, and that power was handed to unelected bureaucrats who you couldn't vote for and you couldn't remove. The second essential prerequisite of the European Union project is that the nation state should not just be devalued, should not just be downplayed, but actually should be completely and utterly destroyed in the name of power going up to some form of higher order. And the third big reason why the European Union was indeed the forerunner of all that had to happen in 2016 is that it was all about making something that was big. It was all about making something that said government can run your lives better than you, the ordinary people, can do. It was all about saying that independence and liberty were actually small and unimportant things compared to the intelligence and the education and the wisdom of these great bureaucrats who could sort your lives out better than any of you could do. Now, it wasn't based on evil. It wasn't based on failure. It was rather like communism, which I believe was the big idea of the first half of the 20th century. It was based on actually making the world a better and fairer place. The trouble is, ladies and gentlemen, that very often the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Now, we do need to get some perspective on why the European project came to be. In 1870, shortly after Bismarck brought the different German tribes together as one nation, in 1870, what do? They invade over the Rhine. And we have the Franco-Prussian War. In 1914, they do the same thing again, but with bigger and more lethal devastation. And in 1940, guess what? The Germans invade over the Rhine again with even more deadly implications, not just for the peoples of Europe, not just for the Jews and the Gypsies and the homosexuals, but actually for the whole world. And the idea of the European project was in many ways a high-minded one. It was, what do we do to stop the Germans destroying the world? What we do is we merge all the different nation states of Europe together into one, and if we do that, we will stop war from happening. Now look, I'm the first person that would say it made complete and absolute sense to get the French and Germans together in the mid-1950s over the table to break bread with each other. But it is, I'm afraid to say, it is a history that has gone badly wrong. And I'm not surprised, and I say this in this great seat of learning where Churchill is not just a hero, and quite right too, that he is a hero, isn't it? Absolutely, for all of us that love liberty and freedom. But it was Churchill himself who, after the war, I think in his own frustration and desperation, given that 3 times in the space of an average life of 70, we'd seen these terrible things happening. Churchill himself had put forward the idea that perhaps there should be a United States of Europe. Now, I'm not going to compete or contest with your President Larry, who has been studying Winston Churchill since 1974. But I am going to put forward my own observations, because Churchill, in this great referendum debate that we've just had in the United Kingdom, Churchill is always claimed by both sides to be their champion. So the great supporters of the European project, be it David Cameron, remember him, he was Prime Minister once before the referendum. I wonder whether the history books, I wonder whether kids in 200 years' time will remember David Cameron. I don't think so. That was a bit cruel, wasn't it, really? Good. But both sides of this argument claim Churchill to be on their side. Mr. Cameron would claim Churchill to be on his side. Mr. Schulz, who is now leading Angela Merkel in the German opinion polls, would claim Winston Churchill to be on his side. And people like me, the horrible, low-life, unintellectual, rabble-rousing populists. And they're the nice things they say about us. And we claim Churchill to be on our side too. What is absolutely clear is that Winston Churchill, whether the European project went ahead or not, did not believe that the British nation should be a part of it, because he saw we had wider links, bonds, and associations with the English-speaking peoples of the world who were our cousins and our families, and he was right about that. The bigger question is, would Churchill, particularly post-Brexit, which I have no doubt he would have approved of, would Churchill have supported the European project in its current form today? Well, as your President Larry made clear at lunchtime, the one thing about Churchill was he was, to his fingertips, a Democrat. He believed in government of the people, by the people. And I genuinely think that his post-war words about bringing the different warring tribes of Europe together would completely have changed when he saw what a fundamentally undemocratic mess they'd made of the opportunity they had of it. Can you imagine a form of government in which the people that have the sole right to make legislation are the unelected, appointed European Commission? Does anybody in this room seriously think that Churchill would have supported a Europe where the bureaucrats had taken over from the Democrats? I do not believe it for one single moment. I don't. Absolutely not. Now, when I first got elected to the European Parliament, all the way back in 1999, I mean, I can scarcely believe that I've been there for that period of time. Let me tell you something, they can scarcely believe that I've been there for that period of time. And I look back on the photographs of me first going into that place. I was young, I was dark-haired, I was shy. Well, that bit's not true. But when I first went in there was, it seemed, a total inevitability about the European project. A total inevitability that the United Kingdom would join the euro. And yet, what we learn, I believe, is that Brexit is the beginning of the end of this totally artificial and fraudulent project. And as far as I'm concerned, the sooner it comes to an end, the better. You see, you cannot build a project that is designed to make a United States of Europe, is designed to give people a new flag, a new anthem, a new currency, a new police force, a new army, a new president that, of course, no one's ever heard of, although I did do my best when it came to Herman Van Rompuy to bring him to a bigger audience. And when I hear these criticisms of Trump, that Trump gets up at a rally and he says something that might be slightly inaccurate, well, he does it because he's not been scripted. He does it because he's not reading off notes. He does it because he speaks from the heart. And I know something of this, because my speeches in the European Parliament are not scripted, are not read out. It doesn't mean I don't plan them or think about them. I do from the moment I get into the shower in the morning. But when you get up to give a speech, when most of you are asked to give a speech, it'll be at a child's christening. It'll be at your brother or your daughter's wedding. It'll be perhaps after a family funeral. When you get up to give a speech, and I know people are terrified, I always advise them, don't use notes, don't read, look at the audience that you're talking to, use your diaphragm to protect to the back of the room. Can you hear me at the back of the room? Yeah, bad luck. There we are. And remember, when you're giving a speech, that nearly everybody in the room is on your side. Now, I've always used those principles in the European Parliament. And when it came to the appointment of the first president of Europe, it's amazing. We were told that Europe, for the first time, would have a president. We were told it was going to be somebody of such standing that he would stop the traffic in Washington and Beijing. I thought, crikey. They must have somebody pretty good up their sleeve. And I thought for a bit, could it be Tony Blair? But I realized, of course, that being president of Europe was far too low for his global ambitions. But I was expecting somebody really pretty important. And I was in my office in Brussels, answering a few letters and ignoring the smoking ban and things like that. No, it's okay, don't worry. I'm not betraying a secret. I am a smoker, which makes me a great sinner. I've decided to completely ignore the new legislation on smoking, and so I continue to smoke in my office. They keep writing me warning letters. And the last one said, "Dear Mr. Farage, if we continue to find evidence that you smoked in the European Parliament's office, we will fine you." So I've written back a very nice letter. And I've said, "Dear Mr. President of the Parliament, rather than going through all this mess, why don't we just organise a monthly standing order?" So when Mr. Van Rompuy was announced as the new president of Europe, the man who would stop the traffic in Washington and Beijing, I turned to my colleagues and said, "Who the hell's that?" I think I might have vaguely heard of him. So I had a rough game plan going in, which was to say, I'm not sure he'd even stop the traffic in Brussels. And to generally say to people, who are you? I've never heard of you. But quite where you've got the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk came from, I will never know. And it's got me into endless trouble for years to come, so I can forgive the Donald when he makes the odd little faux pas in a freelance speech. My motivation for doing all of this was really quite straightforward. I don't have the classical background that career politicians have. And I'm not, despite all of these years, in any way a career politician at all. As Larry said, my parents spent a very great deal of money in spending me to one of the finest schools in England, where I learnt many things about horse racing, gambling, and much else. I went for a career in business. I worked for 20 years in the commodities business. I bought and sold things. I traded things. I worked mostly for American companies. I was involved in global trade. I had the ambition to build a career. I had kids very young. I played golf at weekends. I went to church and the pub on Sunday. I was normal. I was normal. And then I saw something that was going on in our lives and in our nation that I thought was absolutely, fundamentally wrong. I saw our career political class literally giving away the ability of our nation to make our laws, the ability of our nation to control our borders, the ability of our nation to make our own friendships across the globe. And I began to become very, very worried about it. And I read about it. And I started attending meetings. And I started seeing people. I started writing letters to the newspapers, one or two of which got published. They were the really moderate ones, I've got to tell you. But I began to ask myself, how can it be that a great nation that has basically invented the concept of parliamentary democracy, how can it be that a great nation of Magna Carta, how can it be that a great nation that defied the Kaiser and defied Hitler and defied all tyrants and did it not just for us, but for the freedom and liberty of the rest of Europe too, and a great nation, by the way, without the help of America, in both cases, that could not possibly have succeeded. And thank you, thank you, thank you. But how could it be that a great nation would willingly give up the right to govern itself, give up its sovereignty, give up its identity, even allow its passports to have stamped on it European Union? How could these things be happening to this great nation that my family, along with others, had fought and given blood for? How could this be happening? And our political class, even those that thought it was wrong, hadn't got the courage to stand up and fight for it. And when I understood this fully in the early 1990s, I thought, the hell with you, our political establishment. I am going to fight. And so I got involved. I got involved in this great project. I joined a brand new political party, because the party that I've been a member of, not an activist, but a member of, the party led by Margaret Thatcher, a party that actually believed in nation and democracy and something was now led by these very, very weak people. And I battled and I campaigned all through the years. And I became the most mocked and the most derided and the most laughed at figure in British politics. But none of it mattered a damn to me, because I believed what I was doing with my friends and supporters was the right thing to do. And then as many years went by, and as many of the predictions I'd made about the European project, what it would do to our businesses, what it would do to our economy, what open-door immigration would mean to former communist countries who'd not made the transition to full Western democracy, then, far from being mocked, far from being derided, far from being seen as the patron saint of lost causes, which I thought at one point would be on my gravestone. Oh no, the whole narrative changed. Suddenly, I was dangerous. Oh yes. Suddenly, I was an extremist. Suddenly, I was a bad person, spewing bile, poison, attempting to divide society and bring back hatreds that had not been seen in Europe for 70 years. And I have to tell you, when you come into this and you battle this and you're outside the mainstream political class and you don't have money or wealth or support, to come under attack like that was really, I have to be honest, quite a scary thing. And then one day, I got a letter, about 5 years ago, got a letter from a man who wrote to me. He said, "Dear Mr. Farage," introduced himself. He said, "I'm 93 years old." He said, "In World War II, I served in Bomber Command." He said, "Let me tell you, you only start taking flak when you're getting near the target." And that letter was an inspiration to me. Without UKIP, and I suppose immodestly without my contribution towards it, we would never, ever have forced Cameron into giving us this referendum. But we did. And we got this referendum, and against all the odds, and against all the pundits, and against anybody, we won this referendum, and we are going to get back our independence, our liberty, our democracy, our freedom. It has all been worth it. All of it has been worth it. And then a funny thing happened. I thought in the wake of that great victory, I'd take a little holiday. And some friends and I went to a place called Cleveland. You may be familiar with it. And taking place there was the Republican convention. And ever since I was a kid, I'd seen these images of American conventions where after the speech, you know, the balloons come down, the ticker tape, the razzmatazz. I thought, do you know what? I fancy a bit of that. So off we went, demob happy, to Cleveland. And I simply could not believe the impact that Brexit had made upon the American people. I couldn't believe it. I simply couldn't believe it. And I don't just mean the Republican delegates at the conference. I mean bartenders, who I tend to meet quite a lot. I mean US naval veterans. Everywhere I went, people were saying, "Hey, you're that Brexit guy." And everywhere I went, people thought this was exciting. This was incredible. This was breaking the mold. And it all led to a series of events where I found myself in Mississippi, in Jackson one evening, at a fundraising dinner for 1,000 people, and I was asked, would I speak about Brexit to these Mississippi donors, to the Republican movement, and to the Trump campaign, and would I speak ahead of Donald J. Trump? Now, I'm not naturally very backwards at coming forwards, but it did seem to me, would I be possibly a bit out of my depth? Anyway, I did my bit. I explained to them how Brexit happened, why Brexit happened, what the disconnect was between ordinary people, career politics, big banks, big business, big politics, and the corruption that has come with that system. I spoke to them about that. I did all of that. And Donald must have quite liked it, because about an hour later, he was due to address 18,000 people in a basketball stadium in Jackson. And we were all sort of milling around backstage. And Stephen Miller, who I'd known for a few years, said to me, "Oh, Nigel, we'd like you to speak at the rally." I said, "Well, you know, I'm not sure. That's absolutely the right thing." He said, No. He said, "Donald's going to introduce you." I said, "I'm sorry." And then Trump comes over. He says, "Yeah, Nigel, when I get to this bit in my speech, I'm going to call you up on stage." I said, "What, you're the warm-up act?" And I suddenly found myself, as a foreigner, although, got to tell you, a bit of my heart is very much with this country, and that bit of my heart is growing, and it is. And suddenly I found myself as a foreign politician in the middle of the US presidential campaign. And there I was on the stage saying to the Mississippians, "I bring you a message of hope. I bring you a message that says that if you, the little people, are prepared to stand up and fight the establishment, what we have proved in Brexit is that nothing is impossible. So go out and do it." And you did. Well, it was an extraordinary experience for me to be involved in that. And I knew it was really working when the next morning I was sitting in Jackson Airport about to catch a plane to Atlanta to change back to London, and there was a live press conference from one Hillary Clinton. They're warming up now, Larry. And to see this live press conference, and she devoted all of it to attacking me. I thought, yes, we're there. Excuse me. God dear, oh dear, oh dear. Now for the serious bit. Brexit and Trump were not blips. They were not short-term revolts of angry people. They were fundamental changes of direction. And when our great-grandchildren and their great-grandchildren look back at history, they will see 2016 as the year people took back control of their lives, their countries, and their destinies. There is a new tide flowing across the entire of the West. It is a tide that has engulfed the United Kingdom and America. It will engulf much of Europe and the rest of the West too. And I have to say to you, not only has nation-state democracy made a comeback, but a return to normality has made a comeback. And the idea that any of us, whether it's me or Trump or anybody, has advocated extremism shows you how far these liberals had gone to control the agenda and change the debate. It's not been easy. It's not been easy to fight against these people, but I am very, very optimistic now for the West And I'm excited. I'm very, very excited that our two great nations, possibly the two greatest nations on earth, are now freed to be friends again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.